Thanks. Welcome back to the 29th Philadelphia Film Festival. I'm Andrew Greenblatt, CEO and Executive Director of the Philadelphia Film Society. I'm thrilled to have here with me today Michael Smerconish for a Q&A on his documentary, Michael Smerconish, Things I Wish I Knew Before I Started Talking. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andrew.
This is a whole new world to us, doing a digital platform and all these Zoom Q&As, but we've had good luck with it so far. And so it's exciting. We get a lot more participation and a lot more inclusivity. More people can join us, which is a lot of fun. You're used to much higher amounts of people than we are.
Well, I'm not used to film though, so it's sort of new territory for both of us.
Well, great. Then we'll share in this journey together. I like that. So the film itself, it documents a one-man show you created. Can you talk a little bit about the process behind both the creation of the show and then bringing it to life as you would have at the Playhouse had the pandemic not interrupted?
So 2 years ago, Temple University Press published what was my 7th book. It was called Clowns to the Left of Me, Jokers to the Right, American Life in Columns. And it was a compilation book. I published 1,047 newspaper columns in the 15 years after September 11 in the Sunday Philadelphia Inquirer and in the Philadelphia Daily News. And many of those columns were picked up in newspapers around the country. For the book, I selected 100 that I thought were my most memorable. And then for each of the 100, I authored an update, an afterword, and I identified things that I'd gotten wrong and things that I'd gotten right and things that I wish that I could have rewritten. And then organically, a speaking tour began that ultimately took me to 25 cities across the country in small theaters, which we dubbed the American Life in Columns Tour. And it was largely CNN viewers and Sirius XM listeners who came out in 300 to 500 seat theaters to hear me speak and tell stories based on the book, based on the columns. It was very successful. I enjoyed myself, and I was looking forward to going back on the road this past spring and summer. My 30th anniversary in talk radio occurred in May 19. And so I was preparing this new presentation. I was really excited about it, a one-man show that would have me on stage for somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours. We put the first 2 dates on sale for the Suzanne Roberts Theater. They sold out immediately. There were 12 dates about to go on sale across the country, and then everything hit the fan. And so we had to refund the money, stop the planning. But I had now prepared this presentation, and I wasn't sure when, if at all, I would get to deliver it to live audiences. And something told me to put it on tape. I couldn't go back to the Suzanne Roberts Theater because the city was in a lockdown. I knew of the Bucks County Playhouse because I was born and raised in Doylestown, and I've often attended shows at the Bucks County Playhouse. So I made arrangements with the Playhouse for me to take over the theater for a day. I brought in a film crew, and I'd love to tell you more about who exactly they were. But on the date that coincided with my 30th anniversary in talk radio, May 19, I stood on that stage in New Hope for 7.5 hours. And the net effect of it was an 1.5 hour to 2 hour presentation that we recorded, and I had no idea what I would then do with it. I took a sizzle reel, 4 to 5 minutes, and showed it to Jeff Zucker, who's the president of CNN Worldwide. And he immediately said to me, I will put this on the air as a Saturday night special on CNN and CNN International, and we'll air it. I was elated. With commercial time, however, it meant that 43 minutes made it to air. I was thrilled with the way that it looked on television, but it was less than half of the full presentation. And that's where Virgil Films stepped in, and they said, hey, we will distribute this for you in sequence as you shot it, the full production. And that's what you're about to show.
That's fantastic. And so I guess you started to hint at this. Talk a little about the filming process. I know you said you had 1 day and you did 7 hours.
Right.
and you had a film crew in a pandemic, which I know a lot of people have been trying to figure out how they're shooting, and some have managed it better than others. What was the process like for you to get this done? How many times did you run the show? Did you run it straight through, stop forward? Just tell us a bit more about the process.
I'd love to. So first of all, the Bucks County Playhouse, at the time that the pandemic hit, was in the process of producing, getting ready for what was their most elaborate and expensive stage presentation ever. I think it was called Otherworld. When we contacted the Playhouse said, we'd love you to use the theater. Actually, it's kind of funny. They said, we need to check with the mayor. And if it's okay with the mayor, then you're allowed to shoot in our theater so long as everybody is masked and socially distant. But we need to tell you that because we shut down mid-production, the theater, the seating area, the stage in part, but the seating area is filled with equipment. Well, that was a problem because very important to the shoot is to convey that I'm speaking to 400 empty seats. We didn't try and fudge that. We wanted to embrace it, that this is a show that was delivered in the midst of the pandemic. So I needed someone competent to be able to pull this off. I grew up in Doylestown in Bucks County, not far from the Playhouse, and I went to the public schools in Bucks County, including Hollycomb Junior High School. And when I was in the Hollycomb Junior High School back in the 70s, it had just opened, and it was very sophisticated for a public school insofar as it had a television studio and a closed circuit system so that morning announcements were all via TV. In other words, instead of listening to a PA system, you'd sit in homeroom and you would look at classmates who were delivering the news and delivering a morning announcement, et cetera, et cetera. I always wanted to be on television from that studio, but I never made the cut. So I was involved in a production capacity for the television news in my junior high, where I established a relationship, a good friendship with a classmate named Chris Strand. We went our separate ways after high school. I went to Lehigh for government and journalism. Chris went to Temple for radio, TV, and film. And we've maintained our friendship all these years. In fact, we would get together over the course of the holidays year after year. And by the third beer, we would say to one another, we should do something together, because Chris had now started his own television production company in New York City. And I was pursuing a radio and television media career. But the moon and the stars never lined up for us to do anything until the pandemic. And Chris was my first call when I thought, I need to record this. He brought in the crew. The Bucks County Playhouse supplied the lighting people and some of the other production folks. And so my favorite part of the story is that I'm thrilled I was able to deliver what I wanted to deliver. Even more excited, though, that I was able to do it with a childhood friend who is really skilled. And I'm very, very proud of the production values. I should also say that Bill Fennelly, who is a stage professional, he's a Drexel University professor, served as my one-day stage director. So I was surrounded by good people as I came in and sequentially, start to finish, delivered the presentation. The reason that it took so long that day is really because of changing camera angles and changing the lighting. I was pretty comfortable in my ability to deliver it. And when people see it, they should know that for the most part, we did things in generally one take.
Oh, that's impressive. So pandemic aside, did you ever intend to shoot this and to preserve it and to maybe have it go wider outside of your tours? Or was the thought that maybe you would tour this for a while and retire it and then bring it back and all that?
The latter. I never, if the pandemic had not hit, then I would have probably by now concluded the tour with about 24 dates under my belt, and that would have been it, and I would have been on to what should be the next presentation. I don't think I would ever have recorded it but for the pandemic.
Well, so there's a good result here. We have a piece of history that we get to keep.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a silver lining because the people who worked on it, from the camera operators to the lighting professionals to the set people to the catering staff, they hadn't worked in a period of March, April, May. They hadn't worked in 3 months. So everybody was kind of hungry to do something. I wish it had been possible to go to Suzanne Roberts, because they were so kind when I was planning this, but the city was in a total lockdown at the time, and it just wasn't in the cards.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's amazing how quickly you turned it around too. I mean, you shot mid-May, and
July
you had
11, July 11, it aired on CNN at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. They tell me that's an awfully quick turnaround.
that is an incredibly quick turnaround. That's fantastic. And so the CNN cut was 46 minutes. Did you say 43 minutes?
Right.
So this is double.
Right.
What didn't make either cut? What stories do you have that you wanted to get in there but didn't quite make it, or you felt that were fantastic but just didn't fit the flow of what you were doing?
Well, the order was changed. The recommendation from CNN was that because it was not the full showing, that we needed to sort of get to certain elements before. My choice in shooting it was to set everything up. So I guess I would summarize it by saying, for me, it's a walk through my career, going back to my childhood in Doylestown, in Bucks County, and talking about how I became interested in the media. And, it was a sort of an up and down circuitous route that finally took me to radio. For example, when I was 12, there was a magic craze that was sweeping the country. There was a magician named Doug Henning. And in 1976, 1977, he had a hit on Broadway called The Magic Show. And magic was sort of the pet rock of the time. All kids my age were doing magic. And at the local malls, magic stores suddenly popped up. The difference between myself and my friends is that I actually went and did shows at kids' birthday parties. So I think you could say that from a pretty early age, that ego of mine was growing, and I was deciding that I liked being in front of people and speaking, and in that case, performing. And it began a trajectory that ends up with my being very active politically, and then asked to provide election night commentary on the Philadelphia local network affiliates, and then the city's only talk radio station at the time, which was WWDB. So I was given these wonderful opportunities, despite my age, to be a political commentator, and then a guest host, and then a guest of my own programs, initially on Sunday nights in Philadelphia. And the rest of it is kind of a steady progression. But a big part of the show, of the film, is that, yes, I walk through some of the fortunate experiences that I've had, some of the achievements that I've been able to record, but I also walk through all the things that didn't go my way, all the rejections that occurred, all of the gigs that I thought by right I had earned, but then were not offered to me whenever there was an opening of whatever the program was.
No, it's a very honest story telling, and I think that's what people are really connecting to. It's really nice to kind of peel back the curtain and see everything, and a non-varnished truth.
Well, it's also, I think it also could not be more contemporary to what the country is going through at this time, because it's not just a show about me. I tell my stories. I talk about making phony phone calls when I was a kid. I talk about working for George Herbert Walker Bush when I was in my 20s. I talk about guest hosting both Hardball for Chris Matthews and also Bill O'Reilly's radio show at the same time, meaning when they would go on vacation, I was working at Fox News for O'Reilly and then walking 3 blocks north to MSNBC and guest hosting for Chris Matthews. But the serious message, because there is one, is that I argue I've had a front row seat for the past 30 years to these immense changes in the media that created the polarized climate in which we're living right now. Frankly, a climate that paved the road for the election of Donald Trump. And I have a very strong message at the end of the presentation as to how we got here and what it's going to take for us to right ourselves and restore civility and restore more nonpartisanship when it comes to media presentation.
Do you think we're on the right path, or at least heading towards the right path potentially? Or do you
No.
feel like we have a long way to go?
No, I feel like we're headed for a cliff if we're not already, descending from it. I don't think things could get much worse than they are now. When I started in talk radio 30 years ago on WWDB, I think about the lineup of that station. The station was a hodgepodge, ideologically speaking, of personalities who were united only by their ability to conduct a conversation and make the telephones ring. Ideology didn't play any role. We had Dominic Quinn, who was a conservative. We had Irv Homer, who was a libertarian. And frankly, the rest of us didn't even know what that meant. Susan Bray was female, obviously, from Australia, had a husky voice, and billed herself as the saucy Aussie. And Frank Ford was a doctrinaire liberal who was married to Lynn Abraham, who was the long-term district attorney in the city of Philadelphia. And, that was the station. But when Rush Limbaugh was syndicated in the late 80s, and when his brand of talk radio took control of the airwaves on AM in the early 90s, it set us on a different trajectory. Fox News came online in the mid-90s, took a page out of the Limbaugh playbook. MSNBC did likewise, but from the left, not the right. Now comes the internet. And what has happened in the end is that we've been provided more choice than ever before. Whatever you want, it's out there. And yet we're all siloed. We're all in these bunkers being fed points of view with which we agree, so that if you're on the left, it's MSNBC and it's Slate and it's Salon. And if you're on the right, it's Breitbart, it's Fox, it's Limbaugh, it's terrestrial talk radio, et cetera, et cetera. And my pitch is that people need to change the channel. And even those who think they're well-read, because after all, they're looking at their Facebook page and the news feed is giving them story after story after story, they don't realize that they're being given things that reinforce the belief system that they already have. So it may sound odd as someone who has made his living with a microphone to say this, but we have got to change the channel. Whatever the channel is you're listening to or watching, you got to mix up your news diet.
And so how do you convince people to do that? Because that seems like the hardest question, right? Like, how do you tell them, get out of that comfort zone, or don't do what's just what you want to hear, and actually do something different?
What I try to do is establish a causal connection between the changes in Washington and the changes in the media landscape. By the way, when I speak about polarization and how we got where we are, it's not just the media. Dark money is a factor. Gerrymandering is a factor. Social media is a factor. Self-sorting. We're living among the like-minded like never before. So there's a whole menu of things that have put us in the position where we are today. But at the top of my list are media influences. And I go back and I explain all of this in the film. I go back and I trace my own progression in the business. And I say, when I was getting started, and when WWDB offered a whole variety of viewpoints on the air, just like every other major talk radio station in the country, the Congress was then 60% comprised of moderates. So many moderates in the Senate at that time among Republicans that they had their own gathering. They called it the Wednesday Lunch Club. And you had Bob Packwood, and you had Bob Dole, Alan Simpson, Arlen Specter, John Hines, Nancy Kassebaum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In those Reagan 80s years that are best remembered for conservatism, I should say most remembered for conservatism, people lose sight of the fact that the composition of the House and Senate was far different than it is today. By 2010, if you fast forward from the late 80s to 2010, now every Republican in the Senate is more conservative than every member of the Democratic Party. Every Democratic senator is more liberal than every Republican, and there's no more middle. The middle, the purple, has completely vanished. And I say that's not correlation. It's not that the media became polarized and, oh, so too did Washington. It's causation. The individuals in Washington have taken too many of their cues from the individuals in the media who exert this dominant influence over primary voters. And that, I think, is what created where we are today. I'll say one other thing. I apologize for getting long-winded, but
No.
okay, so something else that I think is interesting is that Donald Trump first threatened, first offered to run for president in 1987, which would have been for the 1988 cycle. He went to New Hampshire, he gave a speech, it was well received. People then encouraged him to run. He said he was thinking of running. He didn't run in 88. He didn't run in 92. He didn't run in 96. He didn't run in 2000. He didn't run in 04, 08, or 2012. And yet, in every one of those cycles, he told us he was thinking of running. But he did run in 2016. And I maintain that had he run in any of the prior cycles, he would have lost. But he was able to win in 2016 because, as a Harvard professor named Tom Patterson says, he was a road version, a traveling road show of many people's favorite talk radio host. You know, talking about immigration, talking about political incorrectness, talking about trade, et cetera, et cetera. This is straight out of the talk radio playbook. So he was able to harness all of these factors that were in progress for the 30 years that I've been involved in paying attention. And that's where I try to bring it all full circle. So the film begins with me saying, hey, here's how I got my start in this crazy business. Here are the things that have happened to me along the way. Here are some of the interesting and exceptional experiences that I've been able to have while on the air. But in the end, it's a message about our country.
So we are just over 3 weeks away, because we're pre-taping this. We're 3 weeks away from the election. The film festival itself runs through the day before the election. So we end on Monday, November 2nd. How do you think we're going to feel at the end of the day on Tuesday, November 3rd?
If it's possible to be more exhausted than we are already as you and I are taping this, then that will be your answer. I mean, I need a break. I'm like, holy smokes, man, this has been a 5-year process, and it has been a daily fire hose of news stories. It's very hard to even keep up, and this is what I do for a living. It's just one thing after another. And the question is, are we going to return to some more stable period of normalcy, whatever that might look like? I think that if Joe Biden is successful, that we will, I can explain it this way. As a radio host, I used to have, as many other hosts I expect have, a file, literally a file that sits in my studio, which is marked evergreen. Those stories that on a slow news day, you're able to trot out and use for fodder, use for conversation. I have not in years opened the evergreen file. And so it would be nice, next spring to have to go to the evergreen file, to arrive in my studio someday, not with 20 things that I've got to jam into 3 hours, but go to the file for like, wow, what am I going to talk about today?
That would be nice. It would mean things have calmed a little more.
Right.
So I've got one more question for you, because I know you're short on time. We're the Philadelphia Film Festival, and you are here in Philadelphia or its suburbs, and you've been here forever. But you have a national presence. I mean, you do write for the local papers, but you have a national presence, and you have for a while. What kept you drawn to Philadelphia, kept you here in Philadelphia, and how do you think that's influenced what you've done with your career?
Well, I've spent my entire life in a 50-mile radius. I was born and raised in Bucks County. I went to school in the Lehigh Valley. I went into Center City and lived for 10 years when I went to Penn for law school and then practiced law, and then got married and moved to a different suburb than the one in which I was raised. So this is really all that I know. I think Philadelphia is rather unique in that when you compare us, I've seen data that actually says this. It's not just anecdotal, but in Philadelphia, there's more of a likelihood that people who are born here will stay here, which I think speaks well of the area. And I've been really fortunate in that I make my living today hosting a radio program that's heard nationwide and delivering on the weekend a CNN program that's seen nationwide and around the globe. And I've never had to move. So I of course, spend a lot of time in New York and a lot of time in Washington, but technology has changed things so that today it's not required that you want to progress in the media world, therefore you've got to move. I'm not someone who has worked in 20 different radio markets. I've worked in one. And I deliver my CNN program as I deliver my daily radio program on Sirius XM from a local studio, a standalone dedicated studio. So I'm most fortunate in that I get to wake up in my own bed in Philadelphia and be here, and therefore, maintain connection, I think, to this area that has served me well. Because as you well know, Philadelphia will keep you humble. People look at the Eagles and the way that they are treated. If people don't like what you're saying, if they don't like the things that are coming out of your mouth, they let you know.
Without a doubt. Michael, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. We're thrilled to
can I just say I'm elated. I'm elated that you have an interest. It means a great deal to me to be a part of your film festival. I think this is really exciting, and I never expected to be associated with a film. Philadelphia has an incredibly rich history of products that have come out of Philadelphia. So in my own small way, I'm just tickled to be associated with all of that.
Well, we are thrilled to be partnering with you in presenting your film to Philadelphia, because it's something, it is special. You have an incredible story and a lot of very important and timely things to say. So we're happy that people are joining us and seeing it here first.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.